Net zero is one of the areas where all the parties agree. Everybody agrees. Labour agree, the Conservatives agree, the Lib Dems agree, the Greens agree, the SNP agree, Plaid agree. Everybody agrees that our net zero targets are desirable, achievable and attainable, apart from, that is, the new kids on the block in Parliament, which is Reform UK. We view the net zero targets as being the prime reason for the deindustrialisation of Britain. Ironic, isn't it, actually, that the Trump tariffs on aluminium and steel won't hurt us very much because the entire aluminium industry is gone and there's very little steel gone. Why? Because our electricity prices for industry are between 5 and 6 times higher than those in America. But equally, perhaps the real unfairness of net zero policies and subsidy, endless subsidy for renewables, for the foreign firms involved in renewables, has been the impact on domestic bills, something about which there has been an absolute wall of silence and almost no debate whatsoever. So this afternoon, what Richard Tice is going to do is to lay out our direction of travel as to how we think the next government should treat the renewables industry and perhaps to right some of the wrongs that we believe have taken place over the last 20 years. Richard.
Thank you, Nigel. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's great to be back here in the city where I spent a fair bit of time when I was chief executive of a big multinational, multi-billion-pound property company where in just 4 years I tripled the share price and made significant returns for shareholders, where I was involved in raising debt, raising equity. And when I was director and chief executive of property companies, I built thousands of homes, employing thousands of tradespeople, attracting hundreds of millions of pounds of investment into our economy and making significant returns for shareholders. Not a track record that I think our current Chancellor can talk of. We know in Reform, because we've been round the block, how to make money, how to grow companies, and therefore how to grow an economy. And we remember in the 80s and 90s when our economy was growing at 2.5% to 3.5% every single year. If it was below 2%, you'd start to get a little bit anxious. If it was below 1%, it was like a moral recession. Now, they bring out the champagne if you get to 0.5%. We'll see what the GDP figures are tomorrow. But we are absolutely clear. You cannot grow an economy to those sort of growth rates that the likes of the US is currently enjoying if you have the highest taxes for over 70 years, the highest regulations, the greatest wasteful spending of taxpayers' money via the government. If you overlay that with mass, uncontrolled, low-skilled, less productive immigration, and then above all of that, you impose the new umbrella in the last few years of net zero. And the truth is that after the blunder budget last October, all the important statistics are down. GDP's down, job vacancies are up, growth is down, and jobs are down. Confidence is down, investment is down. The only things going up is the wrong bits of data. Public spending, out of control, up. And also, the thing that no one's talking about, the government deficit going up. And one of the reasons is that net zero is without question the greatest act of self-harm ever imposed on a nation by the people in Westminster. It's killing jobs, whether it's in the car industry, whether it's in the oil and gas industry, whether it's in the steel industry, whether it's in the chemicals industry. The truth is that decarbonisation does mean de-industrialisation. And the great lie that's been told is that somehow renewables are cheaper. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realise that the cost of renewables plus backup must be more than the cost of backup. It's basic common sense. You see, you have to have the backup because sometimes the wind doesn't blow, and yes, here in the UK, it's grey outside, sometimes the sun doesn't shine. And here's the evidence that I'm going to show on the screen and the graph. The first graph shows there That blue line there, and this is from the last sort of 15 to 20 years, that blue line is the increase in renewable energy generating capacity. And the brown sort of reddish line is the growth in our electricity price. And there is a direct link between the growth in the electricity price and the growth in renewable energy generating capacity. That is not a coincidence. That is because of the cost of what I've just said. Renewables plus backup will cost more than backup. And how we wish we had cheap energy like the United States. And if we just move on to the next graph, you can see here, the green line there is the UK electricity price. We used to be pretty close 15 years or so ago to the US price in blue. Our price has soared and the US price has stayed pretty similar because they use their own energy treasure under their feet, their own oil, their own gas, their own shale gas, so they have cheap energy, which means they can be competitive. And that's why they are growing at 2.5% to 3.5%, and we're flatlining. The Bank of England last week, of course, basically forecasting that we are in recession. There is the evidence that proves the lie to what the main parties in Westminster have foisted on the British people in the last 5 years or so. And to put some numbers on this, give or take, the government says that the cost of renewable subsidies in the last 15 years is £100 billion. That's an enormous number that's impossible to conceive. So let's try and help a bit. That's give or take about £3,500 per household, post-tax. Before tax, you've had to earn between £4,500 and £5,000 to pay your contribution from your household to the vested interests in the renewable industry. For you to get the right to pay a lot more of your cash for electricity. This is not right. The British people are being ripped off by the renewables industry. And what we're announcing today is we are serving notice on the renewables industry, on the investors, on the operators, and all the advisors and the lawyers had better take note. We are serving notice that not only do we plan to win the next general election, but when we do, things are going to change. Things will change. First of all, what we want to do is, given that the cost of the subsidies is about 10 billion a year, rising plus or minus with inflation, over the next few years with Ed Miliband's mad plans to increase much more renewables, that cost will go up. We will be looking to recover that cost of the subsidies from the renewables industry via a number of routes. The first one, the key one, is we will impose a windfall tax on the wind, as well as on the solar. And we will do that broadly to recover about the cost of the subsidies, primarily through probably a generation tax based on pounds per megawatt hour generated, as well as a special corporation tax rate. This is important because this is the best way that we can help get the bills down and lower the cost of living. The British people need to know there is a direct link between the cost of all these subsidies to the vested interests in the renewables industry and your bills, your cost of living. So we will impose a windfall tax, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's Drax Power Station, which is another massive con and rip-off. The second thing we'll do is relating to solar farms. Solar panels on the roofs of homes and industrial buildings can make sense. Solar panels on our agricultural, productive farmland, including in my constituency of Boston and Skegness, is complete insanity. We have to stop it, and we have to say to everybody, as part of our plans, we will abolish, of course, inheritance tax. It was in our last contract, and we will stick with that. It's very important. And as part of that, we will abolish this appalling family farms tax. But I have to say to those farmers who want to sell out to the renewable industry for solar farms, you can't have it both ways, folks. You've got to make a decision. Either you're part of food production, part of food security for our nation, or you're part of the renewables industry. So you can't double dip. If you sell out to the renewables industry, then you would not benefit from that inheritance tax relief. That's only fair. The third key point that no one's talking about is these things called battery energy storage systems that are starting to be built alongside some of the big solar farms. And lots of the eco-zealots will say, oh, we can store all of this renewable energy in these big battery farms. Well, let me tell you about these. So just last month in California, a huge fire broke out in one of these battery energy storage systems. You can't put these fires out because of a process called thermal runaway. Fumes going up thousands of feet into the air, toxic fumes. 1,500 people were evacuated from their homes. Schools were closed for days on end. And now we learn that actually the soil and waterways have been contaminated with toxins from that fire. No one wants to talk about this in the UK. You don't read this in or on the BBC. And here's the extraordinary thing. There's a complete lack of responsibility and accountability for the safety standards and regulations. No one wants to take account for it. So if you ask the Health and Safety Executive, are they responsible? Not me, Gov. If you ask Ofgem, not me, Gov. Ask the fire brigades, someone else's responsibility. So we're just relying on the safety standards and regulations from people overseas who make these batteries. This is not right. The British people are not being told that these BESS systems, these battery energy storage systems, are dangerous. And until they can be proven to be absolutely safe, they should be banned. So to all those investors who are investing in these things, I just serve notice on you. Think very seriously about it. And then fourthly, pylons. Well, the likes of the National Grid and in Scotland, SSEN, listed companies, their plans as part of the net zero is to put thousands and thousands of pylons across hundreds and hundreds of miles, blighting our environment, blighting our countryside, including in my constituency, where extraordinarily, there's not one, not two, but 3 separate pylon routes proposed by National Grid, where they're consulting, no coordination, no crossover thinking, no economies of scale. It's either negligence or it's deliberate to suit the vested interests who might make a great deal of money. So we're serving notice on National Grid, on SSEN, put the cables underground. There's a report out recently for the National Energy Systems Operator saying that actually, in the medium term, it's as cost effective or indeed cheaper to put the cables underground. When you take account of the extra costs of the compensation to property owners, to businesses. So we're just saying, do the job properly, put the cables underground. If you go the cheap route and put the cables on pylons, we will legislate to force you to take down the pylons and put the cables under the ground. And you will not be allowed to pay any dividends to shareholders until the cables are put underground. So I suspect to you directors, your shareholders would rather you to put the cables underground first time. So those 4 key things will be good for the British people. Investors and operators, take note. Lawyers, you need to put this in your risk warnings as you produce debt and equity fundraising documents. We plan to win the next general election. We will scrap net stupid zero. And we will do whatever it takes to bring the bills down, to bring down the cost of living. So hopefully we will stop many of these ludicrously expensive new projects. We have to make our economy competitive again in order to create growth. We have to make the UK grow again to the sort of rates we used to grow in the 80s and 90s. And in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, President Trump is putting America first. And our future Prime Minister, Nigel Farage, will put the United Kingdom first. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very much. OK, we will take questions. Please raise your hands. I will point to you and just tell us the name of the organisation that you are representing. First hand up is there.
Thank you. Ryan Saby from The Sun. You talk about lowering bills. Now, is it that bills are going to come down per se, or they're just not going to go up by as much? Can you put an actual target on how much bills will come down? Labour Party, obviously £300 before the last election. What is your policy on that?
So I've challenged the Secretary of State for Energy, Mr Miliband, on this on numerous occasions. They've given up saying when the bills will come down, because they won't. Under net zero, they will go up relentlessly. In April this year, the energy suppliers are currently forecasting a further increase from January of another 5%. That'll be 16% increase from July last year. Their bills are not coming down. But if we do what we say, if we recover, give or take, 10 billion a year, that's about £300 to £350 per household per year, post-tax. So that's what we've got to do, and that's the objective. And we're making it absolutely clear to people, we have to stop this rip-off.
And Richard, it's fair to say, isn't it, that in December and January we have had an incredible amount of weather like this. Very, very light winds week after week, very, very grey skies. And just looking at the daily tracker, what, up to 60% some days is gas that we're importing, that we're burning?
Huge increases, and we're totally reliant on importing electricity from overseas. Some days it's 15 to 18%, and of course, therefore, we're exposed to those markets. And what that's meaning is that the cost is going up, and that's why they're now forecasting in April that increase. It could be even higher, when of course it should be going down. You're heading towards the summer, when traditionally bills and demand reduce. It's the opposite.
Yeah, and as for the £300 promise made, forget it. The 171 auctions that were successful, so-called, and the strike prices that were set up for the next 10 years were truly extraordinary, weren't they?
Truly extraordinary. And we get conned because they announced the prices in 2012 money. Well, why don't you talk about today's money, or the cost when actually these wind farms and solar farms are actually built? And there you look at the cost, and it's 60, 70, 80% higher. We're being badly misled, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a hand up there.
Thank you very much. David Lynch from the Press Association. Just on your platform here, it's been about energy and net zero. Do you believe in climate change?
That's irrelevant, because what we're doing is making no difference whatsoever. Not only do we produce less than 1% of global CO2, but the deindustrialisation of Britain, look at the steel plants, look at Redcar, look at South Wales. The announcements come immediately that production is moving to India, and then the steel that we need is re-imported back. All we are doing is deindustrialising Britain. We are exporting CO2 production. We are making no difference to global CO2 output of any kind at all. Do I believe in climate change? Yes, absolutely. It's happening all the time. It always has been. It always will be. Are our seas warmer now than they were 20 years ago? Yes, they are. How much of that is man? I have no idea. Do I want to live in a cleaner, greener, better world? I've been an environmentalist all my life. I just slightly worry that obsessing about CO2 has made us forget about many other things that have been going wrong in our world. Okay, we got over this side, chaps.
Thank you. Ali Fortescue from Sky. Do you think you're definitely not at odds with the public on this? I think the most recent YouGov poll suggests that most people back net zero. And can I also ask about the US Defense Secretary's comments saying Ukraine won't return to pre-2014, saying that returning to pre-2014 borders is unrealistic. Is that something you agree with?
I don't know how the negotiation's going to go. I know that we've taken a big lead on this. I think as a result of Brexit, our foreign policy has been much more robust than it would have been without Brexit. I think that refers to, the AUKUS deal, I think it's an example. I think Johnson's stance on Ukraine is another very good example. What surprises me is that we've never even wanted to talk about peace, just endless, endless war. And if it is true that there have been 1 million battle casualties so far in this war, and that effectively it's stalemated, albeit with a slight advantage going to Russia, then what's wrong with the peace negotiation? Where those borders settle, I don't know. Crimea, of course, is going to be the difficult one. I'm not going to prejudge any of this, but thank God we've got an American president who is seeking peace, not war.
If I just pick up on the first point about the YouGov polls on net zero. Ask the right question. Yeah. If you say to people, do you care about the environment in the British countryside? Of course the answer is yes. We all do, as Nigel's just touched on. If you say to people, are you happy to pay an extra £300, £400, £500, £600 per year per bill for net zero when it'll make no difference to global CO2 emissions, then the answer very quickly changes. And you have to ask yourself one thing. If we were at odds with the British people on this, why are we leading in the national polls?
Well, yeah, and also, politics isn't just about followership. I know we're used ever since David Cameron's days to, what does the focus group say? Oh, let's say that then, because it's popular. Actually, politics is about making arguments and convincing people. And I can assure you, Richard and I, 5 or 6 years ago, were arguing about net zero policy. And I tell you what, on those polls at the time, very few people thought we were right. A lot more people do now. So a lot of politics is about having opinions that you form based on facts, based on passions that you have, and then encouraging the public to go with your point of view. And we are not frightened of any of the tough issues. And if we have to stand up sometimes for minority opinions, we will do so.
Thank you, Harry Farley from BBC News. So talk to those voters who are concerned about climate change. Do you think that their fears are overblown and they look at these policies and worry about the impacts that they would have on climate change? Do you think those concerns have been exaggerated? And if I may, a second one on, you called for a British version of Doge. Who do you think should lead that?
Okay. Reindustrialising Britain, producing the gas we're going to be using to 2050, producing the oil we're going to be using to 2050, and everybody accepts that, producing the steel that we're going to be needing until there's an alternative for many decades to come, producing the aluminium that we need, producing the chemicals that we need, refining, glass making. I mean, we have literally de-industrialised Britain. It's happening at an ever more rapid rate because of our insane electricity prices. And I think that graph that Richard had up a moment ago summed it up. The more Theresa May and Boris Johnson and Ed Miliband have gone down this sort of almost with religious fervour net zero route, the more expensive our electricity has become. And I would say to your viewers who are worried about the climate and worried about what may happen in the decades to come, what we are doing makes no difference at all. If we actually brought back and we were honest about the CO2 production in all the goods that we used, we'd realise actually we're doing nothing. And the truth of it is that China is still going to build another 60 to 80 new coal-fired power stations this year. Big countries like Indonesia, Malaysia. In fact, Modi got re-elected boasting that this year their coal production had gone through 1 billion tonnes. And mankind this year will burn 8 billion tonnes of coal. It's such a big number, it's almost hard. Lee's a former coal miner nodding away over there. By the way, we're not advocating reopening the pits, I promise you. Although the anthracite one up in Cumbria might be useful. So the truth of it is that global CO2 productions are going through the roof. And what we're doing, and we'd love to see them reduce, but we are literally, this is like unilateralism. We're boasting about how well we're doing, we're making our people poorer, we're losing well-paid jobs. It makes no sense.
Just finally, it was only 2 weeks ago on the BBC, we saw an extraordinary headline that I think proves that actually scientists differ considerably on this, where the headline was, under climate change, Britain could get colder under global warming. What on earth does that mean?
Yeah, and Blue Peter told me that we'd be going into a new ice age, so there we are. Harry.
Harry Horton, ITV News. 2 questions, if I may. First of all, on net zero. You might be able to drill for a bit more oil and gas, you might be able to frack a bit more, but in the long term, beyond 2050, isn't the reality that you'll have to either import more of those materials, or you're going to have to invest in renewables, because that's where our domestic energy production is going in the long term. And then secondly, ITV News has done a report today on an extremist neo-Nazi organisation called Active Club England. Some undercover recordings suggest that they're preparing for a race war. You want to be Prime Minister. What do you make of the extremist threat of groups like this, and what would you like to see the government do about it?
Our long-term energy future, I have absolutely no doubt, is not in intermittent energy. Now, if there comes a moment when hydrogen actually can fit the bill, nobody will be happier than us. That'd be fantastic. You know, here we would have a clean energy, easy to produce. That'd be great. But I've been hearing about this for 25 years. We've made virtually no real progress at all. Our future is nuclear energy. I have absolutely no doubt about it. Our nuclear energy in Britain is way too expensive. I think nuclear energy in the Far East is about a third of the price of ours. Of course, you have to have appropriate regulation. We've got to get competitive, small, modular nuclear reactors. That is our energy future. Of that, I have no doubt at all. As far as your report is concerned, thank you to ITV for letting me have a look at the report. And well done you. It's good investigative journalism. These extremist groups have always existed. I guess to some extent they always will. My own view, I doubt there are that many of them. Not that that's saying we should underestimate the unpleasantness, the ugliness of it all, but it is worth, just for a sense of perspective, to remind ourselves that in terms of counter-terrorism activities at the moment, only 10% of their work is dealing with the far right, 80% is dealing with the Islamist threat. So we just do need to get this into some sense of perspective. But not for one moment would I say you haven't done a very good job.
Adam Cherry, GB News. If you're saying all new cables need to be put underground, you're not concerned that's significantly slower and more expensive?
Well, no, because actually what you've got is huge planning delays. You've got district councils, you've got county councils invoking legal actions against National Grid. Actually, the consensus is, if you've got to do it, put them underground and get on with it. That's the simple, least controversial thing to do. And NESO's own report says that in the medium term, it's a similar cost, or could even be cheaper. So I think the evidence is there.
So do I. Okay, where's the microphone gone now? Yeah, hello, sorry.
Hello, Nigel, Richard, Jessica Frank Hughes from City AM. The Confederation of British Industry says net zero is a strategic necessity, and that the green economy grew 9% last year versus 1% in the rest of the economy. You want Britain to grow like it did in the 80s and the 90s. What do you say to British businesses who have invested in the green economy?
Is that the same CBI that wanted us to join the gold standard back in 1929, and the same CBI that advocated joining the exchange rate mechanism, and the same CBI that advocated that we join the euro? Oh, they're the people. Yes, and the same CBI who, last time I looked, only represent 8% of jobs in the private sector in this country. I'm not terribly interested in what the CBI has to say.
And let's be very clear about these so-called mythical green jobs. About 80% of all of the offshore wind farms are overseas owned. The biggest single owner is, of course, Danish investors through Ørsted. And a lot of these wind farms are being built by engineers and construction firms from overseas, and then serviced by engineers from Norway and Denmark and others. You can understand that because they own them. But in terms of British jobs, we're being sold a lie. And we've got to have the courage to tell it as it is.
Just following on from Ali's question, it's Archie from The Independent. Do you think Ukraine should be able to join NATO in principle?
I've always been against it, as you well know, asking the question. I've always thought that the eastwards encroachment of the European and NATO was a mistake. But that's then. You know, I predicted this war in 2014, as you well know. I stood up in the Parliament and said, there will be a war in Ukraine. I was the only British political figure to get this right. I think where we are now, and again, it's back to the previous question, I don't want to prejudge how these negotiations go, but I would have thought that if we're going to get Putin into a place and Zelensky into a place where we could have a reasonable negotiation, I would have thought, looking ahead, it's probably essential that Ukraine joins NATO. That's going to need to be part of this negotiation. It's a guess, but that's where I see this going. Yeah. Sorry. Look, I wish we hadn't done what we did. For all those years, I've never wavered from that view. I think actually EU encroachment caused the instability even more than NATO. I remember, the Orange Revolution, and they're waving EU flags in the square in Kiev, as we called it then. But, that's then. We are where we are now. Am I supportive of a settlement that ends the war and ends any further encroachment into territories by Vladimir Putin? Absolutely.
Will Mathis from Bloomberg News. During the presentation, you showed a chart of increasing renewable generation and power prices in the UK. Why did you choose not to include the price of natural gas in that chart, which has been the primary driver of power prices?
Really?
And what can
so why is the price so low in America? Because they extract their own gas and they use their own gas. It's as simple as that. Which was the second graph, as you know.
Texas, for example, produces just as much of its electricity from wind as the UK, but they do have much lower natural gas prices. So,
which proves the lie that we're told that there's only one international gas price, okay? So there's not. And we've got the courage to tell it as it is and to stop this misinformation permeating from Westminster across the United Kingdom.
But so what will you do to bring down the price of gas in the UK?
Very simple. We should be extracting our own energy treasure from under our feet. Oil, gas, shale gas. This is owned by the British taxpayer. Rather than leave it there, any nation, any sensible developed nation that's got energy treasure under its feet is extracting it. And we should do the same. It's grossly negligent to leave that asset in the ground when we own it and we could have cheaper bills, higher growth, more jobs.
Okay, we're going to do one more because we really aren't moving on.
Hi, Nigel.
Yes.
Mikey Smith from the Mirror. One of your MPs, Rupert Lowe, who I think is the only one who's not here, yesterday in an interview said of Tommy Robinson, I don't know what he's done, I don't know why he's in prison, and also said that he deserves to be given the credit for the things he's done right. Do you agree?
Well, everybody deserves to be given the credit for the things they've done right. Was Robinson right to talk about grooming gangs? Of course he was. Should he be in solitary confinement? Of course he should not. Should he be in prison? Well, as far as I understand it, contempt of court is one of those things that you go to prison for. So I think this is the third time he's been in prison for contempt of court. So different people take different views. But I'm very clear where I stand on it, as you well know. Right, okay, we'll do other questions afterwards, one-on-one. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.